Welcome, everybody, to the first episode of the Film Buffet Podcast, your weekly entertainment roundtable of an endless smorgasbord of entertainment. This podcast is about all things film, where we talk about some of the biggest news in and out of Hollywood for the week, and I'm glad to finally get the show off the ground, and I'd like to introduce my co-host with me, and hopefully for a long time, Mr. BEyondDaBliz himself. How are you today?
I'm doing fine, Tom. It's good to hear from you again. I'm glad to be a part of the Film Buffet podcast. Look forward to it.
And of course, as you just heard, my name is Tom, your resident film snob, Tom Connors. A few things I wanted to get into right in our flagship episode. I know there's a lot of Alien fans out there, and the new movie's just right around the corner, Alien Covenant. And with all the interviews going on, Ridley Scott has been out there doing, the press tours. And recently, he did an interview with Entertainment Weekly where he talked about the sequels, or prequels, however you want to look at it, come after Alien Covenant and before his original Alien. But then he said something about coming back around and doing some sequels behind Alien, and people are confused, and he hasn't really come out and verified what he exactly meant by that. Some people think he might be trying to erase the movies that were coming after. Some people think he might be just going to be filling in the years in there, and I thought it could be one or the other myself until I kind of stumbled upon some stuff that I remembered seeing a few months ago, and I shared with Beyond here about the possibility of a de-aged Sigourney Weaver showing up in later films. So first and foremost, I want to get your take on this and how you kind of perceive what Ridley's kind of up to here.
I think it's interesting because I think he can go either two ways. I think he can probably, this really all depends on if Alien Covenant does well. If Alien Covenant does well, I think it will be, because a lot of the reviews that have come out were giving a pretty decent review, so I think there's a good window that it could do well.
Right, it has gotten fairly decent to mixed reviews, but yeah.
Absolutely. So we could definitely assume that there's going to be sequels. I think Ridley Scott, because I know a lot of people out there don't like some of the Alien sequels that come out. I know Alien and Aliens are the two classic films of the Alien franchise, and the other ones really fell all apart. So I think there could be a chance he may be trying to erase the other films that came out, the ones after Aliens, and then maybe trying to fill that in with something else. I do think there is a possibility of a young Sigourney Weaver, just from what we've seen with films like Rogue One, where they had they've recreated Tarkin and, of course, the late Carrie Fisher, in those films. So I think there is a possibility there, especially in this day and age with the technology and the way it's going. So I think there is a chance. I still think his comments are a little bit ambiguous. Again, it can go either two ways, where he wants to make more prequels, more sequels, the after the Aliens. So it's kind of I think we're gonna have to really wait and see to what more information comes out, because I know sometimes articles, they kind of interpret things in their own way.
Well, and this was an actual. Yeah. I'm talking about the actual physical interview with him, the video interview where he specifically said Alien 1.
The idea for Prometheus, which is the long way around, because it will be a prequel. Mm-hmm. And then the next one will be Covenant, which is, again, the sequel to the prequel. And then after that, unless we run out of steam, we'll then come into the rear end of Alien 1.
That really got my attention there. I mean, he could have meant Aliens, but the way he said Alien 1 really led me to believe that's where he plans on starting after these prequels. And then the question is, okay, are you still going to continue to just fill in that gap between Alien and Aliens? Or are you really going to pull a Blomkamp, but only one film sooner? And that's what's got a lot of people concerned, and me especially. And I mean, sure, you, like you just said yourself, but you have enough faith to know that I don't think that he'd ever want to step on Aliens. But do you think with his ego right now and what everything went down with Blomkamp behind the scenes, do you think that's even a possibility at all?
I think Aliens, I know, is a very classic sci-fi film. I don't think he would tamper with it, because there would be too much fan backlash. It's different with Blomkamp, because the situation with Blomkamp is that if you look at Chappie and if you look at Elysium, he was basically, for all intents and purposes, I respect the man, but he was kind of a one-hit wonder. At least his first movie, District 9, was a wonderful film. I remember seeing that 7 years ago when it first came out. Then Elysium happened. It was okay. It was all right. I didn't really like the film too much.
I didn't really do that well. See Elysium, but yeah.
Right. And then you had, of course, the recent Chappie,
which I actually did like,
which you actually did like, but the movie felt like he was basically, instead of promoting his own passion project, he felt more concerned with trying to use that platform to get himself into directing Alien, kind of putting himself all his eggs into one basket.
Right.
And I think if he would approach it where I'll put an idea on the table and it can be put in at any time period, like he can change the structure and whatnot, and the story can still work, I think there would have been a chance that it could have panned out. I just think that he didn't anticipate Ridley Scott really returning to form, because we could see, even with The Martian, stuff like that, Ridley Scott has been having success lately. So I think Ridley Scott really wants to take, and he's also getting up there. He's almost 80. He's going to be 80 in November, I think. So I think he really wants to get these movies out there as fast as he can, because this is his baby. This is one of this is his baby, essentially.
And that's understandable. I mean, of course, the ego is going to come forward, and understandably so. And it's like, I want to take, and he even kind of said that in so many words, I want to take control of this again, and that's totally understandable. But I can't see how he could ignore the fans that are out there saying, we want this, and they really, really do want this. And like you said, the time is kind of clicking here, not just for Ridley himself, but for the opportunity for this other movie to even possibly happen at some point, which we know now is not going to happen. But, I just to even see maybe even Ridley's version of that, do you think that's even a possibility? Do you think he'll come back around on the other side of Aliens then if he doesn't delete Aliens in the process?
Yeah, I hope he does. I'll say this, though. One of the things I'm also thinking about in my head as you're saying this, it would actually be easier if he had a Blomkamp working with him. I think Blomkamp would work better with Ridley Scott, like someone who he's under, so he can really hone on his skills and really get better at his craft, because he has a lot of potential. Even though Elysium I didn't like and thought Chappie was okay, he still has a lot of potential. And he's actually worked with Sigourney Weaver. I know Sigourney Weaver was in Chappie, so he's worked with her before. Ridley Scott does need help, because he is getting older, and of course he can't handle this all on his own. If he really wants to please the fans, he could do both. Like he can do his prequels and do the Alien films, kind of like what we're seeing with Disney and Star Wars, how you have multiple directors working on different films and how they're able to look at them out every single year. So I think to make the fans happy, why not work as a team? Why try to hoard this all yourself?
I would think that would be a good idea. An article that came out today, he talked a little bit more about, well, I don't know when he actually discussed this, but the article came out. I seen it today. And he talked a little bit more about the whole Blomkamp situation. And the way he put it was, and the way I got it from the way he was putting it was, is you don't want two different things from the same brand out there at the same time to confuse people. And this really does kind of make sense in the sense of if you're somebody who obviously knows anything about copyright and intellectual properties and how it actually works, and how somebody could actually take that to court and say, oh, this person is diminishing my copyright by using this. He's kind of using that mentality, which I'm sure you kind of know, and a lot of our listeners are probably familiar with now because of all the Star Trek controversy recently, if they're keeping up with it, and they'll definitely know what we're talking about. And,
I've been definitely keeping up with that as well.
And I think that's the direction. Yeah, I think that's the direction he's kind of coming from on that. Is he didn't want a Blomkamp alien out there, and he didn't want a Ridley Scott alien out there at the same time. And then he kind of just washed his hands and said basically he had nothing to do with it afterwards, which is probably kind of true, considering, like you said, Chappie really kind of put the nail in the coffin for Alien 5 ever really having any future, especially considering how much Ridley has come on board and really pushed trying to do another Alien film, and now he's got that, and he's even reporting that the next film is going to be ready to roll in 14 months, which puts that movie out to about a 2020 summer release date. So, I mean, and that makes complete sense.
They can fast track that really easily, especially nowadays.
Oh, yeah, and that's just it. I mean, it wouldn't take, and he's probably correct. They probably are, and as long as, and barring any major, box office snafu on their part, which I don't see happening, because even Prometheus did very well considering how much they tried to hide that was an alien movie. And
which I still to this day think in hindsight that it was a complete mistake.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean that worked in the absolute opposite direction. That not to do too many spoilers for anybody out there, but if you haven't seen the movie yet, then I guess what are you going to do? But just kind of the opposite of what the Split campaign was, is they did everything they could to hide the fact that it was what it was. When people finally got there and they told their friends, well, you got to go see this, but I can't tell you why.
It worked better because the context was better.
Oh, definitely.
Prometheus, especially the name, it needed the extra push to really get people to see it. I always keep saying, I wish they would have called the movie Alien Prometheus.
Oh yeah, and
I think it would have just been it would have made like hundreds of millions of dollars more.
And going overall back on that in the past, because that is kind of important to this in a way, because it does not really give us an idea it really takes away the true idea of how Alien Covenant could perform, because they didn't advertise that necessarily as an Alien film right off the bat, and it took time for the word of mouth to get around that it most definitely was. And I think, like you said, that really hurt their box office. And they did kind of at the last minute try and, make people realize that by making the trailers look just like Alien, giving us a lot of shots of things that really kind of made us, okay, it is probably an Alien movie. But like you said, I think that really hurt that movie's potential. And here you have
too little too.
Right. And now you have a situation where this movie could really blow up big. And if that happens, it's going to be one of those things where in like 3 weeks, people are going to be like, what Blomkamp Alien movie? I know in Hollywood anyway. But I mean, do you think the fans are ever going to be able to forget that, even if it is a big hit?
I think people are still going to remember. I think people are going to want it even more, because it's going to give them the idea to say, oh, well, if this can happen, then I want to see Blomkamp's version. I want to see this expanded upon. I want to see more. I think this is going to increase the thirst and the lust to want more Alien movies. And I think, again, I understand where people are coming from, and especially with you saying, and there is true how can they jump between different timelines? That is an issue. I think a way it could work is that if they were to have it be at least 2 years apart, I feel like they could make it work. It still would be a uphill battle, but it could work or it could not work. But overall, I do think that, if Alien does succeed, I do think that it will make people want Blomkamp's more.
And I agree
with that. Or it could do the opposite.
Well, if anything, I think what will happen is down the road that Fox will probably pressure Ridley to probably do a similar project, if anything. But I think we're looking way down the road, and it might even be a position where finally, when about the time Ridley's kind of ready to hang it up anyway.
I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this movie does. I do think it's going to be successful. I do hope maybe eventually there is some way that Blomkamp can make his Alien movie, because I think the fans would be very pleased by that. I just hope that, again, that Ridley Scott, if the time comes that he needs to work with somebody else, he can allow that person to fulfill their vision, because then you don't want to end up with like a situation where like the Fantastic Four, I know that's like a really bad example, but
it's true.
You have a place where a director had his vision and he was so strong-armed by the studio that he wasn't able to fulfill that vision.
And that's where I think the problem would come in here too. Not so much, I mean, it could come from Ridley himself, but like I said, I think it would be coming along, that time where he'd say, I'm done with this. And then where does Fox go from there too?
Yeah, I think by the time it would be good to get some new blood. Of course, Blomkamp is still pretty young, so hopefully he'll have a few hits between now and then. It might happen. Yeah, that's what he needs to do, is he needs to go back, do a few smaller projects. Hopefully something will hit like District 9 did, and then the talks of Alien 5 will definitely fire up again. I think that's true. Oh, I think so. And I think that if he does a great film, like if he gets, and that's the thing I keep saying about Chappie. If Chappie was great, I think the fan backing for his Alien movie would have been much, much stronger. So I think, like you said, if he goes back, does a great movie, like you said, I think there's a chance that it could happen again, without a doubt.
Right, and the timing would be much better then too, because like we were saying, Ridley will probably hang it up by then anyway.
Absolutely.
And we could even just see this as in like, I mean, if this does well, I have a feeling that also another end of this, Fox could turn around and maybe even turn it into an animated version. You could see something like that, or most definitely probably a comic book down the road if it doesn't ever happen. But I'm sure it's not completely dead. But, one can hope that, like you said, at the time when it's ready, Ridley can pass the torch and Fox will let them take over and do it as they see fit, because otherwise that's what's going to really put this franchise right back where it was. And it was looking pretty grim. We'll see that too. Moving on then, I think the next thing we really wanted to talk about, and this is just really kind of fired up in the last couple days. First, the word came out that there was going to be another Hellboy film. And at first glance, everybody's like, yay, because this is something that the internet has been clamoring for a long time. But then the word came out, well, it's going to be a reboot. And it's going to be rated R, and it's not going to be a third Hellboy movie. So, obviously, being a reboot, it's going to be something completely different. And we even got a little bit more information about it being much more darker and drawing from the horror elements of the story. Last night, as of this recording, both Guillermo del Toro and Ron Perlman expressed their sadness about not being able to do one more Hellboy movie, and it was kind of just what it was. They were kind of just, kind of keeping it to themselves, but saying adios to the whole idea, but they'd always be there for each other and so on kind of thing. And then later last night and this morning, Jeffrey Tambor, another actor who's in the original two films, kind of shot his mouth off at Twitter And it sounds like he even pissed some people off up above in the higher ups. So this is really starting to sound like this thing was kind of just yanked away from Del Toro and Perlman and those guys, and just given the whole we're gonna do the R-rated grungy gritty, somewhere between a Deadpool and a Logan type movie. Now it sounds like, and this just sounds like a bad idea, because the Jeffrey Tambor is basically just resonating what the internet is feeling right now about this whole situation, and I'm assuming you feel pretty much the same way.
I do. I think that this is what I think James Gunn had this comment a couple of months ago. He said it was either James Gunn or another famous director that was talking about the bad implications of a movie like Deadpool that came out, where we have to understand Deadpool was a passion project from Ryan Reynolds and of course Miller, the director. It was a film that was made on a small budget, and they were able to construct the film in a certain way that they had a minimal chance of loss, but a very wide chance of gain. Of course, we saw in the box office returns, it was a big hit. Critically, it was a big hit, but everything happened the right way. That doesn't mean every single comic book film has to be rated R, especially the same thing with Logan. We saw the same thing repeated with Logan. And I think what's happening here is that studios are like, even with Sony, with their Venom universe trying to create, which I think is going to crash and burn. That's a whole other story. But specifically with this here, it does feel like this is the Deadpool Logan effect, where they're saying, well, it's everyone seems to like rated R movies, so let's go make our own rated R movie, for better or for worse. And it just feels like they just kind of fast tracked this movie to really just make money. And they didn't really try to at least compromise with Del Toro, because I know he wanted $200 million, a lot of money. But I think if they
would have compromised. He would have, to turn around, and like you said, this just came out of nowhere. There was no, even talks about this.
Yeah. And I feel like this came out at the worst possible time, because it was a little bit after they said Hellboy 3 was dead. So it's kind of like they should have gave us some breathing room. This really did feel like, let's just fast track it and reboot it so we can try to milk this franchise out. Now, if you look at Hellboy, the first two movies, they didn't make massive amounts of money. I think that had to do with the fact that they came out at a time where the comic book movie didn't really boom until like really 2008. That's really when things started to rise and change. You saw it with like Iron Man 1, The Dark Knight.
Yeah, it was the first two movies were definitely in that wave of the Spider-Man, the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man wave,
where Spider-Man and X-Men were pretty much the only good ones, and they had success, but it wasn't until, again, 2008 is really when things start to really become into the limelight, into the stratosphere. So I think you have a lot of people that have a cult following with this. It's also a new age of the internet. You also have, Hellboy, that you can really take it and make it basically like Logan, not make it a rated R gritty film, but in a way where the third one is actually the best defining version of the character, like with Hellboy. And I feel like you could have done that, and I feel like to me this was a very much a missed opportunity.
It could have been a very good, it would have been definitely a good send-off for Ron Perlman, the fans, and even if Del Toro was just writing and producing. And that's what I think I was going to get to before a little bit, was like, he thinks he can't do it for less than 200, or even if he does compromise a little bit, get somebody else in there who can take his vision down just a little bit more. And like you said, you could have had a dark, more, you could have been smaller, and it could have helped the film, even because it could have been a little bit more, it's already going to be more personal for the fans as it is, if they'd have done it that way. And if they would have done it, I think it would have not only it had done better than Hellboy 2, but like you said, we're in a completely different era now, where an R-rated comic book movie can really, cause some waves, especially like you said, and unfortunately I like the idea, but I don't like the idea of them not letting Del Toro and Perlman and those guys having one last crack at it, because finally you're taking the reins off of those guys, and they're able to do what they probably wanted to do many years ago.
Right. And I don't want it to, and again, this goes with what I was saying before with Logan and Deadpool. It's not necessarily the R rating, is that you're allowing the R rating made sense for the story they were telling. Let the filmmaker, writer, tell their story, and it will naturally become R-rated or PG-13 depending on what story they want to tell. And it's usually a great story. And I really feel that, like, again, if they were to say, okay, we're going to give you a smaller budget, do whatever you want to do, I guarantee you it would have been a great Hellboy 3. It would have been like it could have been like the defining version of Hellboy.
Oh yeah, I have a
Like I was
feeling
saying before.
it'd be a lot more like Dredd was, kind of probably. He could have
Exactly. Yes, it's very much so like that. Where even though Dredd didn't do well financially, it has a huge cult following.
And that's just it. Unfortunately, in Hollywood, and I said this in my one podcast the other day yesterday when I first brought this up, is that in Hollywood, unfortunately, the word cult means small. And that's the problem that Universal ran into when they decided to pick up the option on the second Hellboy movie from Sony. And they put more money into it. And even though I think Hellboy 2, I'd have to look it up, but I think Hellboy 2 did do a little bit better than the first one.
It did do a little bit better. I can confirm that. It went up, I think, another 10 million or something like that.
But
it wasn't
not
much,
what they
but it did
needed,
go.
right? Yeah, because I think the difference in the budget, though, was quite a bit. But I know Del Toro's one of those, and he can go from here to there and everywhere, and 1 minute he's doing this, and 1 minute he's doing that. But like I said, if you actually got somebody on board that Perlman was comfortable with and that could actually bring the movie in on budget, somebody like the Deadpool director
Tim Miller,
yeah,
a real good guy,
right? Somebody like him would have been perfect to bring on board,
right.
Bring this in under budget, give the fans what they want. Have Del Toro still be involved in very, day-to-day everything, but not worrying about him doing his typical Del Toro thing and costing the studio a bunch of money.
I think that should be a good thing because then you would get some fresh blood, but you would still have your Del Toro feel to the film, but just with a different person driving it.
Exactly. And then you don't have to...
actually been a pretty good amalgamation of the two worlds.
And people are getting sick of superhero origin stories. We've talked about that in every way, shape, or form for the last couple of years here, because they're all almost the same. And that's the problem, is you got to get through these stepping stones to understand who these characters are. But at the same time, when you have something like this that's already an established universe, and you could just pull right from that and not have to go back and retell all this stuff again, which is exactly what's going to happen in this new rebooted R-rated darker Hellboy movie. And I think that's it's going to lose its edge, not so much in the grittiness, it's going to lose its edge in the humor, I think, because that was one thing that made Hellboy unique.
It's going to shackle it because then it's going to have to say, well, we're going to have to retell the story again, whereas I think there's a way they could do it where I wish they would just go right into it, just show Hellboy doing his thing, and then maybe show some flashbacks.
And that's pretty much what they did with the original film, too, for the most part, in a lot of ways. I mean, they didn't dwell on...
That is true. I do remember
They did kind of
yes.
jump back. I think the first scene did kind of... was a flashback, but then they flashed forward, then they had a couple more flashbacks, and that's... You're right. That's... I mean, it's going to be one of those things where they're teetering the line, where people are going to be, ugh, another one of these? And that's the exact reaction I have a feeling it's going to get. Just like the Crow film that's coming out.
And I'll say this, too, and this is another comic book film. I know we keep talking about this film a lot, but I think it can go either two ways. I was also thinking about Wonder Woman as you were saying this, and I'm thinking to myself, because I was looking at a lot of the trailers and the way the film's coming together, it does look like a very conventional origin story. Like you have the hero rising up, learning who they are, generic CGI bad guy at the end, and I'm worried about that as, will the audience be sick of seeing the same origin story repeated over and over again? Now, that's very possible. Even with Spider-Man 1, where I felt like the way they handled that was very, like, we're just going to do Sam Raimi again.
Yeah, and the fatigue is starting to set, and that showed. The fatigue showed right off the bat with people there, because you already had that confusion sparked of, wait a minute, we've just spent, a decade with this other kid. Who's this guy? And I'm speaking from the general audience's point of view, of course. We all knew what was going on, but, it's like, I always look at it like this. If my dad doesn't understand it, or if it takes me too much to explain it to my dad, then they're not doing a good job. There's a problem. And that I first noticed that the first time, believe it or not to go way back, but the first time I had that issue was with the Star Wars prequels. I mean, I had the hell of a time explaining to my dad that it was not, like young Luke, or it was not a sequel. It was Anakin, the guy, and he just, his wrapping of the head around, it's like, this is stupid. And that's the general reaction that the general audience is going to have when you keep trying to pull this shit on them. They're just going to keep, well, this is stupid. I hear that kind of stuff when I go to the theater and I see these previews of these movies. Well, they're doing another, well, this is stupid, and that's the exact reaction you hear.
I feel like that's going to happen with Sony in their Venom movie. I keep saying that. Like, I think what Amy Pascal is trying to do for the an imbecile that she is, and that she shouldn't be working in Hollywood. She should be completely blacklisted. I think what she's trying to do, she's trying to use Kevin Feige and his studio to revitalize Spider-Man, and basically then, make their Venom movie, commandeer him back, and just throw Spider-Man back into their universe, or use Miles Morales, which is going to further confuse people. Of course, I think that Sony's going to get their butts kicked, and Venom's going to fail, or just not even happen. Same thing with Silver Sable. I only think that I think that's going to happen. That's like a social justice crashing project for Amy Pascal. But
I have a
this
feeling,
is an example of the whole confusion with the audience.
Right, and unfortunately, I have this feeling right now that, like you said, Sony's going to use that momentum of Spider-Man in the MCU to push Venom. And they're going to use that ahead of time.
They're going to literally trick people.
Oh, yeah, and they are. And unfortunately, that's what's going to happen. And I know a lot of us want it to fail. I'd love it if it would fail, because it would, basically fast track everything everybody's wanted for a while, and Sony would have to just, walk into Disney with its tail between its legs and go, here you go, give us what you will, please. Unfortunately, that's not what's going to happen, because this is Venom, and like a character like Deadpool that has such a wide audience beyond the normal comic book realm. And this is what happened, I think, with Suicide Squad, is you had a situation where Suicide Squad, if it didn't have the Joker and Harley Quinn in it, would have been a completely different situation. If you
would have been a disaster. The movie would have made no money.
Right. If you took those guys out of the equation, that's what you're going to have here, is you've got that whole feeling of people are going to look at this and they're going to want to see it because of that curiosity factor. Just like with the Suicide Squad, I think that's what really built that movie's box office, was a lot of the curiosity factor. And that's, you're going to have the same
Quinn and Joker and all that stuff.
And you're going to have the same damn thing here. And they're going to do their best, like you said, to trick the audience into thinking this is connected with the MCU. They will use that Marvel banner big and bright and bold right in the beginning of every single preview. I guarantee it.
Of course, you try to trick people, like you're saying. But I actually think they may do the opposite, because here's one of the naive things they're doing. You're trying to make a pocket universe without Spider-Man. They can't necessarily show Spider-Man in the movie, because then that people will be like, what the heck is going on? So I think there's a chance that Venom actually may not do that well. And I hope it bombs.
I hope you're right.
Because,
I do.
Just because I want Sony just to give the rights back and to just be done, because they don't know what they're doing. They're horrible. They're into a horrible corporate company, film studio.
But and I was just going to say that. Sorry, I was just going to say they would be the ones to screw that up of anybody. They would.
Of course. But to further that, to go even further with that, if you look at Venom, he is a comic book character who you and I know, but the general audience outside of Spider-Man, they don't really know who Venom is. It's the same thing.
Right. Not as much as Deadpool, but what I was saying, he does have a little bit of a cult following, as far as he's probably close fourth or third behind Wolverine and Deadpool and those guys, as far as having a more adult-oriented following. And I think that Sony's going to pull, and I did this and said this in my podcast earlier about this situation, I think Sony's going to pull Carnage into this too. And that's really what their selling point is going to be. It's going to be like a Batman v Superman situation, where you're going to have, you got Venom, you got Carnage, now see him battle for the first time ever. I think that's kind of going to be their
Spider-Man, selling point. Really? It's like no one's going to really have interest. That's what I think.
And unfortunately, that's going to happen eventually, but they will try to do their best to pull out that first weekend. They'll try and pull a Godzilla again. Don't put it past them on that. But I hope you're right. I hope it passes.
Sure. I want to put it. They are desperate, though. That much I can say.
This again is just another situation, and it's a similar situation where the studio, or like you said, the production company stepped in and said, well, we're going to do this because this is what's hot right now. We've got this property. We want to push it forward. And I think it's kind of the same thing as, like I was saying before, is the Crow film that they're trying so desperately to push forward and make happen.
I really feel that movie is cursed.
It is. Oh, it definitely is. I mean, just beyond the typical Hollywood curse, it is just cursed in general. You're right about that, I think, because it has not had any success past the original film, and every time they've tried to do something with it, it has done nothing but cost people money and fall apart.
So, it may be like the wrath of Brandon Lee coming back. I don't know.
It could very well be. You never know.
Something is not right with the whole Crow thing.
Never has been.
Left it at the first one.
Never has been, no. And I think you're going to run into a situation here where people are just going to turn away from this Hellboy, because you pointed it out earlier in so many words too, is that he isn't your typical character that you can take Jimmy and Johnny to on a Friday night and not worry about too many curse words or blood or violence. He is not that character, and they're definitely going to try and sell him as a Deadpool character.
Feels like a made by committee move, an initiative. It's going to deter fans away. If they really worked with Del Toro and tried, or at least if they did reboot it, like you said, I would have gave it maybe a year, or even maybe announce it in December. Just give it some time, give it some breathing room, so that it feels like it's more like we did this because, Hellboy still has a lot more stories to tell without feeling like it's a corporate thing to cash in on the R-rated movie.
And that's what it feels like. And unfortunately, I think you're right there because, any other time, like you said, if this would have been, 2 years ago, 2 years from now, we wouldn't even thinking anything of it. Unfortunately, 2 years ago, we'd probably be even more pissed that it wasn't with Perlman and Del Toro, but I think that's really what it boils down to is this is not what the fans want, and so you're already going to alienate your fans, and then like I said before, people are going to be like, oh, we're doing this again as far as the general audience, so I think it's just a lose-lose for both in this situation, and I don't know why. I think even the better idea would have been, and if they were going to jump on a bandwagon, not to kind of steer the conversation a little bit in a different direction, is don't you think it probably would have benefited them better to do like a Netflix series or something to that effect with Perlman?
I think there could. Well, I think it could have worked. I think really you can't really do the Hellboy movie justice unless you do it, a live action film. But if they were to do something completely different, then I would be okay. But I would. With Perlman and Del Toro, they deserve another movie. They deserve another shot.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that, but I mean, if just not to interrupt you, but just say like they do these, like they do the Marvel series kind of, and like kind of how they did like some HBO series where they basically film it like one big movie and then they chop it up. And I think that something like that would have been really, would at least made the fans happy and given them the chance to say goodbye to the fans with this and this character. But I mean, like you said, they do deserve a movie. Don't get me wrong. That's definitely not my feeling on that. But
as an ulterior, I think you're right. As an alternate, because again, you could do it like a Daredevil thing, ironically Daredevil. The way it's so dark and gritty, but at the same time, the way it was very critically acclaimed, and that's because they were able to have the freedom to really do what they wanted without being shackled by the mainstream Disney Marvel films. So I think there is a chance that they could do something like that as an alternate thing. I think it could have worked as well.
But I think it would have worked at least. At least I think the fans would have at least accepted it. And then, like you said, after it did its one run, they could have just done one short season, kind of a third film to kind of wrap it up. I think that Netflix probably would have been on board with something like that. I just don't think they even tried it. And that would definitely be a situation where you don't have to rely on Del Toro, because either you got to, get on the pot and do your thing, or you're going to have to just let somebody else kind of take over for you and just kind of, watch from the side, because that's the only thing I think that, like you said before, and that's the one thing that us fans do have to understand, and you said it right up front, is Del Toro did want way too much money to do another Hellboy movie, and his flakiness is really tough to rely on. So that part I can understand. But at the same time, I can see Perlman working with somebody that Del Toro would have, signed off on at least. Yeah,
produced it. Like, I think he's producing Pacific Rim 2, is he not?
I believe he is, yeah.
Yeah, which is, I think it's best for him right now. I think
he might have even done a treatment for the story too. I'd have to look it up, but I mean he's still involved, and that's what I'm saying. It's not like he hasn't proved in the past that he can be involved with other projects. I mean, even look at the Hobbit situation. I'm sure he holds no grudges whatsoever towards Peter Jackson. If any grudges are held there, it's to do with the studio and how his interaction went with them, at least from my understanding of this, how the situation went down. So, I mean, even if you, like I said, it doesn't seem like he's the type of person that would turn away from the possibility of this happening, especially the way their tweets sounded, and even more so how Jeffrey Tambor's tweet basically kind of put it out there like it was. This is kind of low in so many words. I mean, it's just... It is real low. It's a real kick in the nuts to these guys in a lot of ways, I feel like. And I think the fans are going to be there for him in this instance.
Yeah, I think they're already at an uphill battle right now because of the controversy that's been going on. And it's pretty potent. Like, I remember it was trending on Twitter, I think, for a little
just
bit
like no time. Well, it was literally, I looked back and the timeline was, I think, 10 a.m. on the 8th, it was announced, and then within that time, it started gaining momentum through news stories, and then all of a sudden you had the tweets go down between Del Toro and Perlman, and then Tambor chiming in. So I mean, it's like with him kind of busting it open, I really am. I mean, he makes me laugh and smile in this instance because he's saying what we all feel, and he's saying what Perlman and Del Toro probably do want to say. Because I have a feeling, and I said this to somebody in private the other day, I was like, I have a feeling that even though they signed off on this or whatever, because they had to, because I believe something to do with contractually, they still had a contract or something to do with Hellboy 3. So Del Toro and Perlman did have to sign off on this, and they did so. But I have a feeling they did it with a gun to their head, and even though they were flashing probably a nice little check in front of them too, you know. But I can't feel like they didn't do it under resistance at all. That's the way I feel about it, and it does kind of show.
This definitely wasn't a smooth transition of, you know, ending what came before and having to do. This was a very choppy, controversial decision.
And even Tambor saying they really need to acknowledge Perlman and Del Toro in this, and they're not so much because they're just kind of pushing them off to the side, and that's what it really does sound like. And I have a feeling there's a lot more to this than we're seeing, and I'm just from what I'm picking up in the last 2 days, and I'm sure as the weeks roll on and this gets going and people start to talk more, I'm sure we'll hear more about what really did go down behind the scenes. But I wouldn't be surprised if this was, one of those situations to even compare to, like, say, a Ghostbusters 2016 situation where they threatened the original actors with litigation if they didn't sign on to this film. I have a feeling that the same thing here. And I might be wrong about a check. They might not have got jack squat. They might have just got, like a cease and desist on talking about this, and at the same time signing off here, we're going to take you to court kind of thing, because otherwise you're just holding up this production. And that's probably the excuse they're going to use if that's the case, is that they will say that, well, Del Toro, you had till this amount of time to you didn't do so sign it. Contracts are very odd, and we don't know what they say because they're behind closed doors, and obviously I'm just crap shooting here and just kind of guessing what it says, but and I know that's probably pretty close to what went down. And I don't think that they were in any way, shape, or form willingly ready to sign over the Hellboy 3.
I don't think they were. I think it was like what you said. I think judging by the way they tweet, because you can read a lot in people's words, and I think both of them were like, hey, we're two buddies, we're like brothers, we wanted to do a third one, we wanted to give it a crack, we wanted to make it work, and the studio just didn't want to negotiate, and they lost it, and it sucks. It does suck a lot. I think, again, I keep saying this before, it's going to affect the public, at least from the fan perspective. Now, it can still end up making money. I don't think it will, because I think
you're right, it won't.
Again, it's going to be a movie where it's going to feel so corporate. It's going to feel so rushed. So, we're just doing this to make money, and it's going to be reflected in the final product.
And even if it is good, that's the problem. I mean, even if it's the least bit good, it's going to get that, it's going to have that stink of it from the start. Because darn well all these diehard Perlman fans are not going to go see it. People like you and I probably won't go see it. I just don't see it gaining the audience again, like we just said before. It's the same old thing. Why would we want to go see it again? We can wait for it to come on Netflix. And that mentality is really starting to sink in Hollywood, and it really shows in a lot of these films that have been coming out lately.
You can tell Hollywood is very afraid of Netflix, because Netflix is the perfect hybrid between TV, but also having the autonomy of, like, let's say YouTube, where it's like you can choose what you want to watch anytime, and it's scaring them. It's scaring a lot of the higher ups there, and that's why you see even with the Oscars, they don't want. I think like Beast of No Nation was nominated. I don't think it won, because I don't think so. They are afraid of giving those types of platforms recognition, because they're going to lose a lot of money. And what's also going to do is going to put pressure on the studios to have to make better films and have to make entice audiences more, like better theater accommodations, better quality sound.
And that has been a big discussion in Hollywood right now, is shrinking that window, or possibly even having movies come out day and date at home. as they are in the theater. And the only company that really has said, it ain't happening, at least with us, has been Disney and Bob Iger. And I think that's a real kind of, like you said, I think that's really something that's we're gonna see a lot of that happen in the next few years here. Things are gonna change.
I think day and date works best with mid-level films, let's say like indie films, or like they have like a limited release, stuff like that. I think it can work with films like that. But when you're talking about blockbuster films,
right,
they cannot allow that to happen, because they would lose that box office that they really want, and it would go down. But I do think, again, this is actually, there's some silver lining to this, because this is going to force studios to make better movies, and it's really going to point out or have all, basically what's going to happen is the movies that are bad, like a film like Sony or whatever like that, like what they're doing is, what's going to happen is that if the movie's bad, people aren't going to give it any chance. Even if it's like mediocre, people aren't going to go see it, because they're paying so much money to go to the theater. So it's actually going to weed out the suckers. It's going to weed out a lot of those mediocre films that maybe if they came out 10, 20 years ago, they would have maybe had success. But now, because the medium is so much different, the quality of the films has to improve.
I was going to say, even when I was when I had my own video store and I was working in the video industry, I even went to the theater still a lot then, because it was still even more affordable, and the advancements were working right along, like you said. And now all of a sudden they become stagnant, and that's what a lot of these companies are getting upset about, is the theaters aren't really taking care of their theaters, and they're not taking care of their patrons, and they're not taking care of the product. And their real bottom line is they're worried about selling popcorn, and they could give a crap about anything else at this point. And the only thing that they're going to budge in about is this whole day and date thing, is they don't want to lose their revenue, which unfortunately for them, the first weekend they usually don't see a lot of. So this is really kind of going to be one of those things where it all depends on, I think what's going to happen is you're going to get one of these situations like that was being talked about last year with this screening room, which is basically like you got this box in your house, you pay for the box up front, and you pay a $50 subscription every month, and then you pay $50 per whatever movie it is you want to watch, and you get every day and date movie, basically whatever they have a contract with, and part of that money then goes to a local theater. So I think that's what's going to end up happening, but I have a feeling you're going to have a few holdouts like Warner Brothers and Disney, especially if Disney does it, Warner Brothers will do it. And what that is they'll hold out, and those will be the two companies that basically say, nope, you're not getting our movies day and date with the rest. And I think you're right, and they already have kind of done that kind of same thing already. There is a lot of companies that are doing a lot of independent films, and that's basically what's saving a lot of independent film right now, is these day and date releases on to where people can watch it at home and not have to run to the theater, because a lot of these smaller films like you're talking about, some people would have to travel quite a ways to find an art house theater that's actually showing them.
Yeah, and it's not worth the money. See, no. Films like that work perfectly, brilliantly, because you have it where, I can just watch it on Netflix. And if you are in the area, I can watch it in the theater. So you have the best of both worlds.
And unfortunately, where Disney comes into this, and what I think is going to hurt, and if Disney does anything, it's going to really pull a lot of people over to their side, because they are number one in family entertainment. And besides independent entertainment, this is where the money is when it comes to this, is because families have to basically take out a small loan now to go see Finding Dory. It's ridiculous. So of course they're going to take advantage of this. Disney's not going to be like, nope, we're not letting that happen. You can guarantee several other companies are going to follow.
Oh yeah, and you tell they're because they're a very powerful company. Billions and billions of dollars have been invested and earned from Disney over the years. So they're a powerhouse in Hollywood.
Right.
Now, one thing I was going to say too, in conjunction with this, I remember going to see Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Volume 2 in the theater last week. Again, I will say right now, it was a wonderful film. I think it's a lot deeper than people say it is. But regardless of that, when I was at this concession stand and I wanted to get myself something to eat, I noticed the service there wasn't really that good. Now, this is a particular movie theater I always go to, and usually the service is great. When I went there, they had no popcorn ready. They had none of the other food, none of the little chicken bites ready or anything like that.
Right.
It was they were not prepared to serve the amount of people they did, what they usually should be.
Right, yeah, this is a big movie,
especially in a high traffic, high fidelity season right now with summer movie season, especially a blockbuster. But what I'm getting at is the actual prices as well too, where I think it was like something more close to $5 for a pack of M&Ms.
Right, and it's ridiculous.
$7 for a small popcorn.
Right.
I can't afford that every
yeah,
week.
it's $10 just for a soda too, and we're not even exaggerating. And that's in some areas. Some areas it's worse. I'm sure in like bigger cities it's even worse and worse and worse. And it's funny you mentioned that, and it will segue into our next part, I guess, real nicely, because I too had a really bad experience at the theater with Guardians of the Galaxy. The movie itself was wonderful, and we'll get into that some more here in a minute. But I went in, and I it's hard for me to hide exactly. Okay, it's kind of hard for me to hide who I went to, what theater that owned the theater that I seen it in. But I'll get to that in a minute. I seen it in an IMAX screen. We walked in, and none of the running lights were on. You could not see where you were going inside the theater. We literally had to pull out our phones and use the flashlight to see where we were going. Okay, and then if anybody's ever been in an IMAX screen, you know that the stairs are almost like a straight shot up. It was like a climbing a mountain in the dark, basically. I mean, this is just bad, business. And then basically what's going on with that theater was they were rezoning the area where that theater is, and unfortunately, since it was already owned by AMC, they cannot own two theaters in the same place. So I will not say the company that now owns that theater, but it was bought out by that company, and I guess the people that were there that go there all the time said that they deal with the same stuff every week there, though. This is nothing new. And I think it's echoing a lot of what you're saying too, and this is a lot of what Hollywood is saying, is they're getting sick and tired of people complaining about the one thing being, the concessions, the prices, going to 3D movies and the screen being too dark. I've even gone to movies that weren't in 3D, and they've had the lens turned down a lot farther than it should be, to where you can't even barely see what's going on in some scenes. It's getting ridiculous at the cost cutting that's going on at this level, when these places used to be a place where you could go and it was almost like walking into a like a castle or a amusement park.
Felt like
almost
an event.
Yeah,
Like
it was an event, because you walked in and you felt like, here's your ticket, sir, and you had ushers all over the place, and you had, like you said, you had people popping right up. Can we get you something from the concession stand? You didn't have to wait. You had, people were there at the doors to make sure that punk kids weren't sneaking into the wrong movie. And you don't have this anymore. I've spent entire movies where I don't see one usher come in the entire time. And I'm not used to that. It feels very strange to me. So
You're coming from a different generation as well too, because
Exactly.
you're coming like I think maybe a couple years before me.
Oh, I'm sure, probably.
You're seeing things a little bit different, because when I was growing up, like I said, some of the theaters I went to as a kid, weren't the best, but I still had a great experience with them, especially one theater I used to go to all the time, Lowe's Theater,
Yeah.
where I used to live, and up in New York. And I would love that theater because it had really good quality. It was always great. I didn't know about the concession stand because I wasn't old enough to really purchase it.
Right.
But I can say from this experience of going to the theater, it felt great. Now, one thing I will say is that this particular theater, ironically, one of the things that they did improve it was the IMAX screens. The one I actually went to, they used to have, these dinky, seats that were basically the same as the regular theaters that weren't in IMAX. But what they did now is they're actually adding more premiums, where they had, wooden floors, better lights, better lights for the walkways, and they had actual leather seats. They didn't recline, but they were legitimate leather seats, which is good, because that's going to give me more of an incentive to pay more. Now, I feel like this is what's going to need to happen. They're going to need to start introducing more premiums. I'll give you another example. I think Suicide Squad's a messy film. It's an enjoyable mess, but it's a messy film. I saw that film last year in August when it first came out with a group of friends while I was down in Florida. I think it was a Cinemark. I think that was the theater, and they have their own version of IMAX. It's not called IMAX. It's called, I think, XD, like Cinemark XD. That's their version of it.
Right, yeah.
And I will tell you right now, that was one of the best theater experiences I've ever had. They had leather seats like the one I just mentioned before, but they were recliner seats. It was beautiful. They had two-story theaters. It was like you have the 1-story and a 2-story. It was incredible, and I loved it. And even though the film was definitely a messy film, I had a much better time and better experience because it was worth every penny, because I was getting that premium there. And I feel like that's what's going to need to be a trendsetter through all theaters.
Yeah, and I mean, I seen it. I loved the presentation was perfect. I don't think I've only been to IMAX a couple times, and I loved it. I loved the presentation. If anything, it helped me love the film more. But it was the surrounding everything around it. And like I said, there's been so many times where I've gone to theaters now, and yeah, I'm a little bit older. Let's put it this way: one of the first movies I went to see in the theater was E.T. So if that kind of gives you any idea of my age group. But I mean, I too was from that throwback era where you didn't have 20 screens and 30 movies showing at once. You had to wait sometimes because I lived in a smaller area. Yeah, I had to wait sometimes months to see a big movie. And now it's gotten to an era to where I don't have to wait anymore, and we've all become spoiled a little bit. But I think you're right. I think the theaters really do need to start paying attention to that. And if they really want to have any kind of argument when it comes to this day and date thing, they really do need to make some changes, like you said, and really kind of make it more of an experience and not just a pain in the ass that's going to cost you $100 to take your girlfriend to go see a movie,
Oh yeah, especially if you have children.
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, we're getting a little long here, and I don't want to, push the show too far. So I think that's where we're gonna bring it to a close on this very first episode of the Film Buffet podcast. I want to thank everybody out there for listening. Let us know down below in the comments what you think about all the topics in the show. Down below is also some links to BEyondDaBliz's YouTube pages and the sister pages to the Film Buffet and the Film Snob channel. Just so you know, eventually we want to kind of move this show over to the primary Film Buff channel, hence being called the Film Buffet podcast. But until then, we get all you guys that are subscribed to the Film Snob channel over there and subscribed, we will basically load them up simultaneously on both channels for a little while. But just keep in mind, guys, you might want to run over there and subscribe to that, just so you're up to date with when our new shows come out. And next time we're going to get into some Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 spoilers for sure, and whatever entertainment news pops up between now and then. So that wraps up this week. All right, well, I want to thank you for joining me tonight, and hopefully we'll do this again real soon. I know we're hopefully planning on doing this every week, so thank you for joining me BEyondDaBliz.
No problem. I'm glad to be here.
For BEyondDaBliz and myself, I want to thank you guys for joining us, and hope to see you again next time on the Film Buffet podcast.